Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for doing this. For everybody who's watching, listening, would you please introduce yourself?
Thank you, Rajat, for inviting me. A quick introduction would be I'm Dinkar Devgan, and I've been in the corporate space for about 20 years now. Have done various roles. Speaking with you in the capacity of being an investor today, and excited to be here. That's a very short and a brief intro about me, if that
Oh,
works.
fantastic. Now, let's do a slightly longer one. So considering you're an investor, you have some expertise in certain spaces, and there is a particular outlook that you bring to us that we will be discussing today. So, can you help us understand the context and what your journey in corporate has been, and what sort of how that's colored your outlook towards the fintech space, investments, and then we can get into whatever's more interesting there.
I'm an out and out HR guy. Started out being in the field of HR for about 20 years, worked with different industries. And I also felt that I was blessed enough to be hopping across industries because that's not what usually happens when you pick up a business role. Largely, people look at you with a unified lens. So my exposure has been with IT services in the banking and financial services space.
Yeah, you work with some very small names people may not have heard, but you can describe the companies you
I
work
will,
with.
I will. Yeah. So my banking stint, in fact, started with a payment services company called NCR. They were the inventors of ATM machines, and they are the largest. They hold some patents which kind of are very unique and are still hold a lot of relevance. And then I moved on to pick up my stint with HSBC, and then worked with American Express until the startup bug really came in my life and it bit me. And I worked with startup in the edutech startup space, and that's where, Rajat, if you remember, we've had our first interaction with Merit Nation. And after working for 5 years in the startup space, then I moved on to try my expertise or bring my expertise to consumer packaged goods. So I worked with Coca-Cola, and right now I'm at Google. So that's been
Like I
my
said,
corporate journey of about 20 years.
small brands, but it's okay. I'm sure you will the stepping stones to something greater for you. So thanks for that. So that's been your corporate journey. What has your investor journey been, and what have you done? When do you start?
So I started my so investor. I bring the entire gamut of things that an investor does. Right, we start very small. We start. I'm not restricting my thought to being an investor in the startup space right now. I've been an individual investor as well. So my investment journey started. My first investment actually happened in way back in 2004, where I actually invested in a piece of land that gave me almost 7x returns. And that sort of encouraged me. I felt that, when you're young, you really want to make a mark and you really want to grow fast. So I felt that, okay, this is a good avenue to create wealth. So my next investment was in a real estate consortium, because that's where I felt, okay, this is a magic formula and that would work. And I did lose some money there, I must admit. So not all your investments give you good dividends. My investor, after that, I took a pause. So 2004 to 7 is when I actively invested. After burning my fingers, I took a pause and then went back into the investing habit. I would use that word when I joined Merit Nation. So I realized what an amazing world and how underrepresented and underleveraged the startup ecosystem is. There were two reasons, and when you and I spoke for the first time about Plutos One, that's exactly how I explained that to you. One was driven largely by my own drive to see if we can create one to 10 such startups which actually are built on strong foundations of culture, and that's my HR hat or my HR professional me speaking. The other was where I spent about 2 months in the Bay Area, and I was fortunate enough to be one of the attendees of the startup school, which was housed. This was the accelerator, startup Y Combinator Accelerator, which I was a participant there for the first time, and this was being hosted at Stanford Business School. And I noticed what a thriving community it is, what
Mm.
amazing ideas that come through. And I also got quite intrigued by the fact that how people who've really arrived in life are there to support real time problem solving. And that got me excited about the startup ecosystem. And that's where I started to bring my investments. Did not start immediately by pumping in money. I started by meeting a lot of founders, mentoring a few of them, trying to see how an ideation gets into the execution, and then eventually started putting money into the startup space.
Okay, so you said a lot of interesting things. Let's unpack some of those. You started your investments by looking at it as a wealth creation tool, and today you say that your investments are a way to build a proof of concept of culture leading innovation, good culture leading to good innovation. So I think the larger question is how did that change happen, and how are you expecting it to play out? But also the smaller thing, because I'm curious myself, I don't think we've examined this, is how did you end up at YC and the incubator? Maybe start there.
So, okay. I was working with this edutech company called Chegg, and one of my colleagues, when I was there for my orientation, they were very intrigued, curious to know what's happening in the Indian startup space and my experience of Merit Nation. And while sharing with them, one of them happened to be an angel investor. He said that if you really want to probably build your depth into the startup ecosystem, and during over a couple of rounds of whiskeys, I did express my interest of being an investor in the startup space, and I said that I'm really wanting to build something like that. So he said that you should start at YC. There's a session that is happening at YC, and there you'll get to meet a lot of founders. So why not? And I'll arrange a pass for you. So zero cost. Through a friend, I managed to spend about 30 minutes out there. It was essentially a meet and greet. It was an open forum. They have a slot where post the talks, you do post the pitches, you do have an open forum, and where you come, you just network and engage with a few people. So that's where I got my opportunity. Now, coming back to your point on how did the evolution happen on culture? So I did study a few startups, and I'll stay away from taking names right now. But what I realized was that if the cultural foundation would have been strong, then there was a chance that the startups would have thrived a little longer. I do not know the fate, whether they would have made it big or not, but they would have thrived a little longer because I have not come across a founder yet who understands the opportunity cost of a high attrition or a high turnover rate. And that was my start point. And
Okay.
I also had, when I met you, I was at Google and I saw, I mean, this company has an amazing history, and there's a lot of content that is available internally to us to see how Google had evolved over a period of time and how culture was always at its center. So the reality is that today, in a knowledge age, people are your biggest asset. If you are not being considered towards your biggest asset, I do not know what else should you be using to solve your problems.
Okay. Again, a lot to unpack within that. So for you, what are because you mentioned attrition rate, but what are your other markers of culture within an organization?
So, how are people being, if I have to put it, how are people being treated? How does a person feel when they come, wake up to get to work?
Hmm.
That is the biggest marker. I would steer clear from doing those employee satisfaction surveys because those are all lag measures. Simple testimony is that how do I feel when I wake up and want to go to work? Do I want to be at work, or am I
Hmm.
dragging myself to work? So that's the biggest thing. And while it may sound very subjective, but that's the biggest marker for me. Having said that, internally to an organization beyond attrition, what is the biggest marker? How does the organization work
Hmm.
towards creating an ecosystem which helps its people grow? And I'm not talking about promotions, I'm not talking about increments. When I'm talking about growth, it's about mentally stimulating enough for them to come look forward to problem solving if that is what they are there for. So every startup is there to solve a problem. Every startup is there to solve something which needs to be solved. Are they
Hmm.
creating an environment? Are they enabling their people with the right tools and resources to make it
Hmm.
happen?
Okay. Someone would argue that you looked at startups from an HR lens because you're an HR person. And that's why you think that maybe a lot of the problems for some startups would have been solved if they'd gotten the culture right. Pitch to me or tell our listeners why HR is such a big determinant or why culture is such a big determinant of a startup success and not, say, the technology, not the finances. What is HR's place of eminence there?
Okay, let me move away from a function called HR.
Okay.
I've always been anchoring on culture,
Hmm.
and I will still bring us all onto the culture. It's not about any specific function that is responsible for driving a culture of an organization. It's the people that create the culture, and largely the leadership has that accountability to drive that culture, right? It is one of the pillars and it cannot operate in isolation. Like you rightly pointed out, other levers such as finance. There needs to be money that needs to keep flowing to keep certain basics in place or keep the basics running, right? And I'm speaking in terms of a startup and not with an established or even a mid-sized organization right now. And I did touch upon with a statement that people are your biggest asset. So if you have to draw a correlation, today we are harnessing the intellect of people essentially to solve or even to create technology. Now, people, there are certain expectations. People are not tools or resources, they are humans. They will have certain expectations, they will have certain, I would say, boundaries that they will be required to work within. They will have their own motivations and their own drivers. So how do we create an ecosystem where majority of those needs are catered to and where they are able to find their own purpose, because everybody works with a purpose in mind.
Is there a way to say that culture affects the finances, the culture affects the technology? Is because clear, yes, I'm in complete agreement with you. I don't know if we made the full case yet, but I'm in complete agreement with you that people are obviously the biggest resource that any company has, especially a startup, right? Because if you can get them aligned to purpose, then almost everything becomes secondary, and then the culture revolves around that. But is there a direct line that you draw between culture and maybe other markers of HR, other indicators of HR, and
Sure.
technology and finances and all the other operations within a company?
The answer, simple answer to that is yes, and I will share at a very grassroots level or at a very tactical level. I did reference attrition, so if you want, I can take that as an example, or I can give you a very different example as well. What would you prefer?
Bo- Let's do both.
Okay,
We are here to extract everything inside your brain and show it to our viewers. So let's do everything.
sure. Let's look at attrition, a simple attrition case. If I have a team of 10 people that are supposed to generate hypothetically 1,000 rupees every day in terms of revenue, and realistically speaking, I'm able to generate only 8,000 out of the expected 10,000 revenue that I am required to, there is non-productivity in the ecosystem. People are not being fully utilized, or people, either the goals are unrealistic or people are not being utilized to fullest potential. These are the only two markers that I can think of. Now, if the environment is not right, if the ecosystem is not right, or if the goals are not clearly communicated to the people, people do not know what are they aiming for, what will happen? They will start underperforming, or they might get switched off. When they are switched off, when they are not able to connect to the purpose, they get switched off. When they get switched off, attrition happens. If you have an attrition rate of 20%, losing two people over a period of a year, backfilling them would take you at least 3 months. Getting them productive would take you another 45 days. I'm just giving you a very baseline example. That means we would have lost 4.5 months worth of potential revenue that would have come by just keeping your basics in place and by just, I mean, by trying to be simple in your communication and connecting the person's purpose to the larger vision or the purpose of the organization. So that's one attrition example that I can give you. The other way, how it affects the broader finances is we will see leakage in the system when people try to hide or not be fully productive. We've all seen some examples, or there are a lot many examples that are available on moonlighting. Now, moonlighting can be the result of, can come as an outcome of two factors. One, either they are underutilizing their current capacity, the role that they are playing, or the compensation that they're getting, they are being underutilized for the stuff that they are doing. Or alternatively, they find their passion somewhere else and they are trying it out. So again, it harms the organization. It affects your finances. It affects the organization's capability to progressively work or grow further. And if you have an impact on your top line and your bottom line, then the organization struggles.
Super. Thank you for that. And I know we're recording on the day of the finals, the World Cup finals. So thank you for your time today. We completely appreciate it. But let's talk a little bit about your relationship with Plutus One. So instead of me doing it, why don't you tell us how our conversation around Plutus One happened and why you're actually invested now?
Okay, that's a very interesting piece. For that, I'll have to just take give another additional 3 lines. Before meeting you, Rajat, and before you were looking to solve the problem, I was actively helping a fintech get off the ground, a fintech organization get off the ground, and it was a neo banking setup that they were looking to set up in India. And it was a very unique model where they were trying to create a global product out of India, and this was going to happen from the start itself. So that essentially, I was doing a consulting gig with them back then, and that essentially got me excited more about the neo banking and the fintech space. And I read a little bit about it. I met a few folks from the VC network. I met few people from Omidyar. I met a few people from Sequoia, and I did get some understanding, built my understanding around the fintech space. I came from a very traditional banking and financial services space, and I really wanted to build my understanding on the fintech. So that's where it happened. And when I happened to call you, I asked you what are you up to these days, and you said that I'm trying to solve a fintech problem which probably nobody has tried to solve. And I jumped at the opportunity to pick up my learning. It was more of my need to learn about what's happening in this space, which eventually became you having me on board as your investor, because I was so convinced of the problem that you're solving. And what was unique about Pluto, what is unique, not was, back then, I know that it was all a concept. When we were speaking, you were in very early days and building blocks. One, I had conviction in the founders, with both the founders, and I would like to call that out because you both were a very deadly combination with the kind of problem that you were looking to solve. The expertise and skills beyond that, it is a deadly combination of two people coming together from different industries. So very, very rare to see. Now, moving beyond that, the other layer that if I have to uncover was the problem that you were solving. Now, if you look at it, traditionally, the models that exist today in any business is either a B2B or a B2C. And then there is a new term, which is B2B2C. Now, in all these three models, mostly the organization that is in question sits at the left spectrum of B, which is the business, the initiator of business. This is the first model where I saw Plutus One sitting in the middle B, in the B2B2C space, where Plutus was the integrator and it was trying to solve for three different pillars. One, your regulator, or I would say the payments network services space through your BBPS, right? Second, you were looking to solve the problem for your bankers. And in terms of bankers, it was a tech solution that Plutus One was trying to bring to the banks, or is trying to continue to bring to the banks. The third, and that which I distinctly remember, was that what's in it for the user? Why will there be adoption? And that was my question to you, Rajat, that why will there be a significant adoption? And the way you explained the coupons coming in from the merchants, and the merchant and the transaction volume going up as a result of people finding more reasons to engage on the platform was convincing enough for me to partner with you guys or be an investor on your board.
Interesting. So since you're one of our earliest investors, I'll let you know that even some of the very latest investors to come on board actually find the incentives piece the one that clinches the decision for them. Because there are a lot of players in some of the other spaces that we're working in, some of the other integrations that we're trying to do. But for a lot of people, especially those who haven't seen the incentives piece, it is the incentives piece that's the biggest sort of lever that we have. sitting inside, it seems like a no-brainer that this is the bare minimum that you need to do this, right? And I keep telling people that we wouldn't have built this business if Rohit, my co-founder, hadn't put in the hard work already of building that piece up even before we met. But today, 8 years into the journey, we look back at that piece and think, yeah, I mean that's a given, right? But
True.
so now you're an investor with Plutus One. You're an HR guy who's a big evangelist for culture leading innovation. How do the two marry? So tell our viewers, tell our listeners a little bit about the conversations that you and I have been having around culture for the longest time. Tell us where you see this going, how that proof of concept that you've been talking about in terms of culture, the startup and a startup with the right culture. Tell us a little bit about that. What's
Sure.
utopia? What's the target here?
Okay. What's the target here is having a mature organization shape up. I mean, a very simple example would be that if you look at, and I'll refer to Google's example. There's an organization that really anchored on culture and it built out some solid products, product after products, and then organically, inorganically, it came up with ideas and efforts and product portfolios which essentially taught the world how to probably capitalize on the internet, right? It was disruptive. Most of the products were disruptive in their nature. Now, can we build an organization that helps unleash people's true potential? And at the same time, for people, it is not about just walking away learning, but also, like I said, how many people become more evangelists and they continue and they at the same time they create enough wealth for themselves to become to have that courage to become more evangelists. Because if you look at India, largely majority of our economy is essentially self-driven, and I would say it is beyond employment. People are, I would, self-employed. A large population of our country is self-employed, and there's a lot of self-employment, there's a lot of gig economy that is there. Now, how do we, and that's where it takes me back to the DNA of India or Indians. We are known to, we do have that DNA construct where we can solve complex problems if we are given the right resources and if the worry for the basics is taken away off our mind. So can we help create an ecosystem like that is where the marriage of the two happen, which is the culture.
Super. So you've been with two edtechs now,
Mhm.
right? You talk about providing the right spaces to people to be able to bring out their best, right? To be able to reach the max potential. Are you invested in the edtech space? Is it a space that excites you? Because that to me seems like a very, very good fitment.
The answer to that presently is no. I
Mm.
am not invested in the edtech space as of now. I am not too sure whether I would want to invest in the edtech space unless there's a compelling problem that I come across. I'm yet to come across a problem that is out there to solve, and there is a there's any tech intervention, because most of the edtechs that I see around right now, while on the face of it, they claim themselves to be tech companies, but at the back end, they are largely an organization that has a tech interface, and they're not using the tech to solve any problem. So I'm staying away from tech for now till the time I come across a compelling proposition.
Super. Last question. What is your hope from Plutus One, say over the next 10 years?
Plutus One has to be okay commercially as an investor, if I have to call it. You guys have to be the success because I will be the surrogate beneficiary of your success. So I would love for Plutus One to be very, very successful and very, very integrated into the financial ecosystem of India. Beyond that, I'm yet to see a product which is made in India and made for the world. So if there is anything that I would aim for, then I would aim for a product that is made in India that can be simply lifted and shifted and replicated for the world. Can we do something like that? Is my question or a vision.
Super. Dinkar, Didi, as I know you, thank you so much for your time. Well, whom are you supporting in the match today?
Do I have to answer that?
No, you don't, right? But thank you so much for your time. You have a good day, and this has been very, very useful. Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Take care.